It's 11 o'clock now. Good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to Parallel Session A. My name is Andy Byrne. I work for HEAnet, and I'm going to be chairing this presentation this morning. So as always, please ensure your phones are on silent. This session is quite a short one, so it's going to take an hour. We have two presenters, about 25 minutes each. That'll take us to 12 noon, and then we have a 15-minute break. And then we're back in here again at 12:15 for the final plenary session. So we have two lovely presenters here this morning from UCD and UCC. And they're going to describe some of their experiences. We have one presenter is talking about a systems change, and the second presenter is going to talk about a policy change. But I suppose what they have in common is that these changes, they have to put a lot of thought into it. They had to make a lot of decisions, and the sharing of these decisions and sharing of these experiences, I think, is what's really powerful and really important for this conference, because we're all doing the same things. You know, we all have the same decisions to make, and I think the good experiences and also the bad experience that we can share with each other is really going to bring a strength to everybody's work. So I'd encourage you to ask questions as part of this session. There is a Slido, so if you put in a Slido, go to room A. HEAnet 2023 is where you'll find that Slido session. So first up, we have Maria McDonald from University College Dublin. So Maria has over 25 years experience in the university sector, both in UCD and in the States. She is Head of Enterprise Application Services in UCD, and her talk is entitled Taming the Monster, UCD's Experience in Migrating to a Role-Based Approach to Systems Access. So Maria, welcome to the stage. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, so thank you to all of you for sticking around. I feel a little bit humbled taking the stage after Patricia's presentation. Obviously, what I'm talking about is not life or death, but hopefully I won't bore you too much. Barry won't thank me if everybody's asleep at the end of my talk, so hopefully try and stay awake at least. Okay, so as Andy mentioned, I'm working in the Enterprise Applications Group in IT Services in UCD. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about some of the experience that we've had in terms of, I suppose, trying to move back from a very unmanaged method of giving access to systems towards a more managed and structured approach. I'll talk to you about some of the experiences that we've had and how we've tried to pull back from a difficult situation, I suppose, in some ways. So what I'm going to talk about, I'll give you a little bit of background on our identity management system, just so that you kind of understand what I'm talking about, how our access model evolved, how we kind of realized after a period of time that we had a problem, and what the problem was and why it was a problem, I suppose. What the solution that we kind of identified and that we needed to come up with, and then just at the end, maybe some short lessons that we learned, and happy, as Mandy said, to take questions at the end if necessary. Okay, so just to explain to you a little bit about identity management in UCD, I suppose I'm not talking here about Active Directory as such. I'm talking about applications, business applications. So like we have business applications that we've bought off the shelf, and we also have applications that we've developed ourselves. Things like, student applications for courses, or applications for, extenuating circumstances. We've created a lot of functionality in UCD, and we obviously have bought a lot of off-the-shelf functionality, and we need to be able to give access to those systems. And the way we do that is through our identity management system. So we have a system whereby we've pulled in the identities of all our staff and students and applicants and affiliates, all of the identities of people who might need access to systems in UCD. And what we do is we use a system of roles and services to grant that access. So if we have an application over here, then there is a set of services that we use to manage access to that application. And people can gain access in one of two ways. So you can see on the slide you have kind of users in roles, and then you have individuals down at the bottom who are given access directly. So that kind of shows the two methods. A role could be is meant to be a kind of a business role. So it's a group of users who are doing a similar job, and we all know what those kind of roles are. You know, heads of schools, heads of departments, college principals, administrators in schools. Those are all examples of people doing a similar function across the university for their particular area. So, like, the best way of giving access from our point of view, and I think probably we've discovered from a user experience point of view, is that somebody is put into a role which has a standard set of services associated with it, and that's it. It's a kind of a it's kind of a one-time access, rather than the other method, which is the one where the individual comes along and says, I need, X, Y, Z, and they go to a whole load of different people to get the access. That's less efficient and probably a bit frustrating. But I suppose our systems facilitate the two, because sometimes there are people who fall outside standard roles and do need access to services. So we need to have the ability to give what we call override access as well as role access. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an understanding of the structure of our identity management system. So just to kind of talk about how our model evolved, as I said, I suppose starting about 15 years ago, we started to develop a lot of functionality to roll out a lot of new applications on our platform. We have a kind of a web platform where we can roll out workflows and reports and various different applications. So what we started to do was to develop those services and those applications. And I would say, I'll kind of take the last point on the slide first, which is this question about oversight. There was kind of a period where we were doing a lot of development, and when we look back now, we would probably say, and we would all agree, that at the time there was insufficient oversight of the roles and services associated with applications. So applications functionality would have gone live without the kind of due diligence interrogation that should have been done, I suppose, to make sure that the model that was being used to give access was one that was kind of sustainable and supportable in the long term. So, I think we probably would all recognize that sometimes we don't do things quite as we should from the start. So definitely there was a mistake there. The other points there are kind of relate to how we enabled people to get access to applications. So I suppose in the early days, we kind of used an approach whereby we said, we want to give the ability to super users in business areas to give access. So, we have super users in our registry, in finance, in HR, in global. And the idea was to say that they could have the ability to give access to users in their own area for specific applications. So, in theory, that's a very nice idea, and it's much more direct rather than having people necessarily coming into the central IT. And so we kind of said, well, okay, where we can do that, we will try to devolve out like that. And that was the approach deliberately, I suppose, that we were following. So that those were the kind of two principles as to how we evolved the model. We started to realize that over time that the model wasn't one that was perfect, in fact, far from perfect. So again, I'll take the third point on the third bullet point first. As we rolled out more functionality, we realized that some of the service models really weren't thought through at all and weren't properly considered. And so you would deploy functionality, and really the service model sometimes was overly complex. It relied entirely on override access. It hadn't been given enough thought, which obviously then leads to a bit of a support nightmare afterwards, because people don't really understand it. And then the other thing that we realized was that this method of devolving access to super users, or enabling super users to give access, wasn't working in all cases. Some people just proved themselves to be not very good at it. Some people proved to be very good at it, but then left the role. And then other people were, kind of diligent about it at the start, but then kind of stopped doing it. So over time, as you looked at the data, you realized that it wasn't being properly maintained. I suppose there was a kind of an emerging problem that, we were in a situation where people had access to systems that really they shouldn't have had, and access wasn't being ended in the way that it should be. I'm calling it chaos, but I mean, obviously we were all working away. It's not apocalyptic, but it still was something that needed to be addressed. Okay. I suppose we kind of realized that some things that kind of made us realize that it was a real problem. I suppose feedback from users. We realized that users were end users who were trying to get access to systems were being kind of sent all around the houses. Well, I need access to finance systems. Okay, you go off over there. I need HR data. You go off over here. I need student applications. You go off over here. So from a user experience point of view, it was terrible, and it took a long time to get access. If you came into the university, that took a long time. If you moved, then again, that took a long time to have your access to one side removed and then over to the other side. So it really wasn't a good user experience. I talked about the fact that our security models weren't well thought through, they weren't properly documented, they weren't necessarily very transparent. So even ourselves, I don't know that we necessarily already fully understood them. So that was a kind of a problem, because our support team or our super users would be giving access. They didn't really know what they were giving access to, and it was quite kind of complex and too complex, really. GDPR then started to kind of rear its head, and obviously we're all much more conscious of the importance of this now, and rightly so. I suppose, again, as we looked at the data, we realized that there were an awful lot of people who had access to kind of sensitive information on students or on staff that they shouldn't have had because they had moved to another area or somebody had messed up in giving them the wrong level of access. So that's inherently a place where you don't want to be. And, I suppose in a way that was probably one of the main triggers where we said, well, we really have to try and do something about this, because it's not something that we can kind of keep supporting. And then I suppose from a support viewpoint, it was like there was an awful lot of work in giving and maintaining access. We had a support person whose full-time role really was to manage support requests and try and figure out how to give people the access they needed. So, these were kind of issues that we needed to address. Okay, so I'd say about 2.5 years ago, we kind of, gradually were reaching the point where we said, okay, we need to do something about this. And the solution, I suppose, that we have come up with it's two-pronged, really. And again, I'll take the second point first. It's kind of, I suppose, addressing it at the beginning, trying to stop the problem from becoming worse. We needed to, where we were rolling out new services or new functionality, we needed to say, okay, well, what is the service model going to be? And be much more stringent about interrogating and, I suppose, asking the questions, who should have access? What are the roles in the university that need access to this? What are the services? What are the levels of access that are required? So much more, I suppose, thought put into it at the beginning, so that we don't keep adding to the problem. So that we started to do about 2.5 years ago, and I would say that we have been quite successful in sort of stopping the rot from that point of view. Like, we're much more controlled, we're much more kind of trying to say, well, okay, let's talk about the roles. Who needs access from a role point of view, rather than does Joe over there need access, or does Mary over here? That's not the way we approach it anymore. So I think we've done a good job in that, and we've kind of brought it under control from that point of view. And then the second thing that we've tried to do, I suppose, is the first bullet point there, which is that question about migrating all the existing mess, I suppose, into standard roles. Now, that's the piece that's definitely a work in progress, and it's going to take quite a bit more time. But the principle is that your access is based on your role. You start in UCD or you change jobs, and whatever your role is, it's a standard role, and you're given access to systems based on that role. And the services are attached to the role and not to the person. I'll talk a bit about the work that we've done to try to move towards that. And it is definitely a long process. So our first steps were kind of looking at low-hanging fruit, and there was a lot of low-hanging fruit. Like, we discovered, as you started to look at the data, like, that was set up in 2013, and the person has actually never accessed that system. They were given access because they were brought over from an old system. That's just, again, not good oversight. We didn't think about it enough. And so immediately we just got rid of, hundreds, thousands of overrides just by saying, okay, if somebody has never used it, then clearly they don't need it. So we kind of made some fairly rash decisions, you might say, but kind of based on, okay, well, they're clearly not using it. So loads of examples like that, where we were able to kind of significantly reduce the overrides. I have a distinction here between total and exceptional overrides. So there were services that we primarily managed via overrides, and we actually moved away from that as well and tried to base that more on standard categories of people. So, for example, if all staff need access to a service, then we said, right, well, we don't need 3,000 staff overrides, we just give it to the staff role. So we were able to make a significant reduction in the problem quite quickly, so that was good, and it sort of became almost like a little competition for the team as to how we would get on week by week, so that was great. We then started to look at it from a system point of view. So an example here would be online applications. That all is locally developed functionality. And basically what we did was we engaged with the business. And I suppose that's definitely fundamental in trying to address this. We needed to sit down with our admissions office and say, okay, here's what we have. They were actually managing the overrides, so I suppose we weren't feeling the pain as such, but there definitely was all the confusion of how to get access at the right level and stuff. So we sat down with them, we reviewed the overrides, we kind of identified roles and said, look, 70% of the people in this role have the access. Shouldn't we just give it to the role and get rid of all the overrides? So we worked with them and got their agreement on that. We used a little bit of one of the team, developed a kind of an automation tool to migrate. We had in this process created a whole load of kind of dummy management areas. So, I mean, those of you, obviously all of you working in universities, you know that you've got a university hierarchy. We had kind of created this sort of side hierarchy, which was new management areas, which were kind of the same as the existing schools and units, but we had used this for access, and that clearly wasn't something that we should be doing either. So we used some automation that one of the team had developed to identify, okay, well, this XYZ is actually the same as the School of Computer Science. So let's just map everything over to try to simplify the model so that it wasn't so complex. And again, on online applications, we were quickly, through that, able to reduce the overrides down by 1,000, over a fairly fast period of time. This is not finished, and we are actually moving to a new application system within the next year, so there's more work to be done. We don't want to go live with a new system with the model still not quite the way it should be. So we have a good bit of work to do still. But I suppose it's an example of how we've been working on trying to improve things. This is our long-term goal. I was watching a TED talk about how to do a really good TED talk, and one of the things they said was, you pause and you let people read it, and then you pick out words. But anyway, I won't pause because I'm running out of time anyway. So, like, long-term, we're trying to use this role-based method, and I've kind of said that already, I suppose, to engage with users in business areas, to engage with HR, so that actually the Holy Grail would be that when somebody is appointed to the university, their role is already defined, and when they come in, they're put into that role and all the services are associated with it. We're a long way away from that. We really need to engage with HR but I think we're kind of knocking on an open door a little bit now. I think people realize that it's important, and that that it's something that's not just an IT problem, it's a business problem, and that I suppose users, we're less efficient by virtue of the way that we're doing things, and that we can improve it by doing something like this. So going from somebody very frustrated in terms of the user to somebody happy. I don't think it's actually the same person. I think he lost weight in becoming more happy, but anyway. Okay, so our steps then. What we plan to do, and are in the process of doing all the time, I suppose, is engaging with our users to understand the business roles. So we have a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment where we're looking at our college administration units and our school administration users, and trying to map with those users to say, well, okay, what is your structure? And trying to agree a common structure, because I suppose there's a tradition in UCD, probably the same in all universities, where people are inclined to say, oh, well, we do things differently here. We're different from them over there. And I suppose what we're trying to do is say, well, really, how different are you? Okay, maybe traditionally you've done it that way, but is there any good reason for it? And it's kind of like chipping away a bit at that and kind of saying, asking the question all the time. And gradually, I think we're kind of making progress on that. I do see a point where we possibly will have to engage at a senior university level to say, okay, here's what we're proposing, here are the blockers that we're finding where we do have remaining blockers, and maybe at some point asking somebody to say, look, this is how it has to work. But we're not really at that point yet. We're more at the kind of engagement and trying to work with people. Because I suppose I find in UCD, if you tell people that they must do something, it doesn't always work very well. So we're kind of trying to work with people rather than tell them what they have to do. So in terms of these roles then, as we create them and as we get agreement on them, we're trying to auto-populate them where possible. So we're looking at our structure and we're saying, well, okay, does this, can this role be populated based on a job title? So if that's the case, then we can just auto-populate it. People drop in and out of it based on their job title. If they change job title, they lose the role. Or can we base it on a cost center? Or can we base it on a unit code? So there's all these kind of fields that we have that we're trying to automate where possible. And obviously, worst case scenario is that we don't have that and we need to have it done manually. But in lots of cases, you kind of can automate. And then we're chipping away still at the overrides, bringing them down and down and down, so that eventually when we have them at a level where we think it's the correct, or broadly the correct number of overrides, then we'll put in place a kind of a notification system. So at the moment, if you lose the service, you're not notified to say that you're going to lose it. Ideally, what we want is that every override that goes in has an approver against it. It goes in for a period of time. We kind of have a year as the amount of time that it goes in for. About a month before you're due to lose it, you get a notification, the approver gets a notification, and then there's an automatic process whereby it can be renewed. We don't have that in place yet, but that would be kind of the next step. So again, taking out a lot of the manual stuff and the pain from users in terms of trying to gain access or maintain access. Okay, and I suppose, what have we done in 2023? So we've had, in total, I suppose, over a 50% decrease in the overrides on our system. So that's an achievement, I suppose, and we're very happy with that, the progress that we've made. We've completed role definition across a number of different areas, really working with business users, and we've agreed the roles, we've agreed what services those roles should have. And so we've made really good progress on that, I think. It's not finished, but it's getting there. Our support calls are reducing all the time. Now that's obviously in itself not necessarily a metric, but I think we are certainly feel that people are experiencing a greater ease in getting access to systems and more clarity on what they need to do in terms of gaining access. So that's a good thing. And then our little monster is a little bit more friendly, so that's good. We're happy about that. Okay, so then just finally, just a few lessons learned, and I've kind of said all of this already, I suppose. We realize now that the service model is kind of fundamental when we're implementing systems. We're still implementing lots of new systems. I suppose we're moving more towards externally purchased systems, but the same principles apply to that as do to the stuff that we develop locally. We need to really work with our business users and say, okay, who should have access? What are the appropriate levels of access? And challenge users in their I suppose, assumption that there are valid reasons. If they're saying that there are reasons why individuals need something that's different from other individuals, we really need to kind of challenge them and be sure that is a true business need and it's not just a whim on the part of somebody. Because I suppose I don't know that our users necessarily understand the implications of something that a service model that becomes kind of unsustainable. They don't really understand that, and we need to therefore be the kind of custodians to say, no, that's not something that we can support, because ultimately I suppose it is all about, is it something that we can support, and if we can't, then we really need to kind of question it. And I suppose, I think you would hope, and I think it will be the case, that if we do that from the outset and we're much more, I suppose, disciplined about it, which we are trying to do, that it just saves a lot of stress and angst for people later on, both for ourselves and for our end users. So that's all I have to say for you, to you today. Thanks very much for your attention.
That's great. Thanks, Maria, for that. It's a real practical example of things we're doing, so appreciate the experiences learned. We do have a couple of questions coming in from Slido, so appreciate the questions coming in. If we can put them up on the screen there, yeah. So the first question that's come in is, have you tried to follow security models used by professionals who handle real secrets, e.g. military or state agencies?
Okay, the short answer is no. No, I mean, this is very much stuff that we're just doing internally. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we're kind of doing it as we go along. We're not really looking at what, I think there probably is maybe work that we can do to see external models that are out there. But as of now, we've been just kind of working on it internally and just trying to chip away at it, I suppose.
I guess there's different levels of accreditation as well. I mean, this is part 1 level, and then there's a second level, might be extra bits. Okay. And we do have real secrets as well in UCD, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
Okay. Second question comes in is, have you implemented any audit controls, such as quarterly access reviews, to ensure the problem doesn't reoccur?
Yeah, like we have a kind of a structure in place whereby we have weekly meetings of the group that so there's a team of us who are sort of overseeing all of this. We have weekly meetings to review new service models, new requests to change things, and then we do have, as part of that weekly meeting, we're kind of looking at stats all the time, kind of saying, well, okay, we're looking at very specific things. One of the team has really developed a very good dashboard where she's kind of looking at, okay, well, these are key things that we need to be tracking and saying, okay, why was that added? And that then usually leads to okay, we need to have another conversation with business users about it. So we're kind of actively looking at it all the time to try to keep a handle on it.
Okay, very good. And then the final question that's come in is, do you have super users in different departments to assign to specific roles, or is this now all done by the same team?
Yeah, so the super users, we do still use that structure a bit, but I suppose we're kind of basing it on experience. We've discovered that some departments are better at it than others and are more diligent. So if we feel that people aren't doing it properly, we kind of take it away from them in consultation with them. But if we feel that it's just not, then we need to sit down and say, okay, we need to do this a different way. So we're not automatically taking it away from everybody, but we are looking at it on a case-by-case basis, because it doesn't work in all cases.
Right.
And that's kind of been proven,
Yeah. There's one more question. There are a few more questions, but unfortunately we won't get to them. We just need to keep on time. So I'll take this last question. Do you use third-party tools for identity management, or have you rolled out your own? If so, which tools are you using?
Yeah, so our identity management is our own at the moment. It kind of sits on our Oracle database. So yeah, we're not using a third-party tool. And now we are using, so obviously we are using Active Directory on that side of things, but on what I'm talking about, this is our own identity management database. I think, as we move towards more third-party applications, that probably will be something that we will do, but we haven't done it as yet. So that's for the future, I think.
That's great, thanks. There's a few more questions. I'm sure you can talk to people after this if it needs be. So, look, thanks very much, Maria. If you can give your appreciation for Maria again, please. So next up we have Barry Foley from University College Cork. Barry's worked in UCC since 2002 and has since 2019 has held a position of IT Security Officer. Barry has responsibilities around compliancy, audit and IT security. Lots to handle there, Barry. And Barry's talk is entitled Fortifying the Digital Fortress, Strengthening Cybersecurity and Enhancing Organisational Resiliency in UCC. So Barry, thanks very much, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Andy. Good morning, everyone. This is just going to be a talk of what we've done in the previous 4 to 5 years and what we're going to be doing in the future, what we've learned and what remains. So just it'll be a quick overview, some of the challenges that remain after that period that we've identified, why we felt there was a need of a paradigm shift from traditional defence to organisational resilience, and the difference between those two approaches, and just the importance of resilience in cybersecurity strategy. So just the period that we've just gone through, which would have been covered by the university strategy and then by the digital master plan for that period, and then there's also a separate IT security strategy. There was mainly a focus on defence, so and a lot of that focus on defence was on initial access. So if you look at the kill chain, there was a lot of, as Marie said in the previous talk, there was low-hanging fruit there that we knew we could go after, and we did. There was things that were easy to identify, and we moved during that period of time from being very reactive in that area to being preventative and proactive in our security. We used numerous frameworks over that period of time. So the MITRE framework there for, which would identify initial access between the start of the kill chain. There's been a lot of a move towards NIST, especially with the government publishing their the public sector bodies' security guidelines and baselines. And then we've been audited with ISO 27001, and our controls, our cybersecurity controls, were based on NIST. So there's numerous frameworks there, which people might recognise that there's a litany of them out there. We are kind of coalescing on NIST, and we've asked our auditors as well to focus on that when we are audited in the future. Our risk decisions over that period of time were based on probability. It was the likelihood impact matrix. I think it's the same for most organisations, not just higher education. And we prioritise our improvements then based on what was the least expenditure for the university that would have the highest disruption for cyber criminals. So that meant that we went after certain programs first during that period. During that period of time, during the last 5 years, there's been a huge increase in the demand for compliance. So whether that's audit compliance, the Comptroller and Auditor General report used to be in as recently as 2021 was a one-page response. It is now 11 pages, or it's 11 sheets on a spreadsheet. It's over 100 questions. We have internal audit response. We also have a response to the statutory financial audit, which would be the same for nearly all higher education institutes. But the amount of effort required from the security team is just increasing year on year, and that's it's a large demand of time that takes away from things like defence. Despite the move from being reactive to preventative, major events that have happened both nationally and within our own vertical have actually meant that our cybersecurity response has actually been dictated by external events. So the big one there in 2020 would have been COVID. And then in 2021, the HSE attack. And then, there's been various attacks against higher education institutes. Over that period of time, there was 2 significant ones in the month prior to the HSE attack, but the HSE attack really sucked all the oxygen out of the room for, any other kind of response. And because of that, then, there actually has been a large investment. That's one of the benefits. There actually has been a large investment in cybersecurity over that period of time. So in the external environment, then, we've also seen in that period of time a huge increase in the volume of attacks. It's increasing. In some types of attack have increased 20x over the period. We have seen days in UCC where we've seen hundreds of thousands of attacks of one particular type. We've seen tens of thousands of attacks against individual accounts, and they're at a volume that we just wouldn't have seen in any period at the beginning of that 4 or 5 year cycle. There's an increasing complexity and pace of evolution. So things that we've done that have really increased our cyber posture have actually been circumvented, or we can see the circumvention starting. So multi-factor authentication is obviously one of the big improvements that a lot of us have made, in the last 3-4 years. But even yesterday, now we saw an adversary in the middle attack, against a university account, where the attack, if successful, would have circumvented the multi-factor authentication in place. And the other thing then is the severity of impact. I think our response to COVID in general as a society, and then in the education sector as well, the reliance that we have on technology on a day-to-day basis to deliver absolutely everything, teaching and learning, to everything across the business, allowing hybrid working. The severity of impact of an attack is such that it's higher than it would have been previously. And that brings us to the first thing that we have a problem with when talking about all of these things, and it's a problem with how we actually score risk. So this is not exactly UCC's risk matrix, but effectively it's the same. We score likelihood or probability 1 to 5, and we score the impact 1 to 5 for risk within the organisation. And then we multiply those scores, and we get, 25 is higher extreme, 4 by 20 and 5 are 4 by 5 and 5 by 4 are both high, and then we're into the medium highs depending on the scoring. However, cybersecurity risk has been scored at a 5 continuously for multiple years, over a decade at this stage, despite the fact that the severity of impact has increased dramatically over that period of time. So just being put into a box doesn't actually give the whole story of how risk has actually increased. Again, with likelihood as well, it doesn't actually show the improvements that we have been made, because although there has been massive investment in cybersecurity, we've gotten so much better at detecting and responding to events that do happen. We are actually dealing with a risk here that is the most dynamic risk that an organisation faces. I think it's EY in our latest report that's what they defined it as. And because that dynamic risk, it means that when we make an improvement, there's actually, in a lot of cases, human operators who actually try to circumvent those controls that we put in place. So it's hard then when we present to the business when there's investment being made, when we tell them about the good things that we are doing, but yet, the likelihood or probability score, again, it doesn't look like it's changing because it doesn't allow for that kind of granularity, and that is problematic. So we do think that there has been a large focus on likelihood and probability in the previous 5 years, and that there has been very little movement in the overall score. We have brought it down, but again, the granularity is problematic. And we just felt then that in analysing how we did over the previous 5-year period, that what we needed to do was have a new strategic focus on to see what we could do with reducing the impact of risk. So while we will never ignore both sides of the risk matrix, we do feel that we can look at impact and see how we can reduce it. And our approach to this is by building resilience within the organisation. We know from events that have happened both within the education vertical and in other organisations about what the most realistic scenario is in a cyber attack when it becomes, a crisis for the organisation. So we've seen it played out in organisations in the US, in the UK, here in Ireland, and through mapping those scenarios and how they affected those organisations, we've looked at those scenarios and how they will play out in UCC and how resilient we would be at the moment, and where we could actually improve our resiliency to reduce the impact of specific scenarios. We're implementing this impact reduction strategy across all areas of the university, so it's not just for IT. It is applicable to IT as well. However, for it to actually be beneficial for the organisation and to reduce organisational risk scores, it needs to be applied at a unit level within the university to be successful. And what we're going to do, as we have tracked our impact, our likelihood reduction in the previous 5 years, we will track resilience as a key metric within our cybersecurity for the next cyber strategy period. This is just an example of how we actually present our risk metrics to our governance teams within UCC. So that would be to an IT steering group, and then to the university leadership team. And Ger Colley would bring this information to them. This is something that myself and Katie and Quiva and Ruth would work on a monthly basis. And I think, again, one of the problems we see there, and I think one of the problems with, presenting metrics in general is, however we measure cybersecurity metrics, and it's been said before that if it's out of 100, if it's out of 10, if it's out of 5, basically we come around that the risk is a medium. And there is a limited value in bringing it down to one score. So what we try and do is focus on the relevant pieces of information, track them on a monthly basis, and then on twice a year there will be a large report on how we're doing in general with cybersecurity. At the moment, there's only one item there that's actually tracking a resilience metric, which is our moving endpoint computers away from on-premise domain to being fully cloud managed. And look, as many of us know, AD is one of the main components that makes something from being like, a crisis to, absolutely disastrous for an organization. Our dependency on AD and systems is something that actually makes us less resilient. It's something that has been identified as a sensitive system. And this is one of the things that we are doing currently to migrate those things from being on-prem domain managed to being cloud managed. And that's the first thing that is being tracked there. So what we mean by resilience in UCC, we differentiate cybersecurity defense as being IT security, and then organizational resilience or cyber resilience has been the ability to survive an attack. It's the survivability of the organization to a cyber event. We're saying that it's not everything. There's a lot of vendors out there who just interchange cyber resilience for cybersecurity, and we say, so we're not saying that it's basically the entire NIST framework. It is basically when an event has happened, is the organization really resilient enough to actually continue with its core mission. Organizational cyber resilience, so then there's just from what the US military, basically what they would call as survivability of the system. So identifying the need of a system, or the entire system has to be able to stay up and running. What they would say is that survivability is more important property than security. We probably wouldn't go that far, but definitely it's something that needs to be a consideration in procurement when we're actually rolling out updates, that the resilience of the organization is actually not adversely affected by any changes that we're making. So how do we start off on this path? So we look at what we want to be the desired future state of the university, and what are the key things that need to happen to actually get to that state. And as we heard from UCD earlier, staff engagement and engagement with the actual business and how they are actually using systems is essential. We are prone in IT to actually make assumptions that people use systems in the way that we actually present to them. And we just know from, again and again, that is not the case, and something that we have to go out and actually ask them and get them to show us how they are using systems, so that we can ensure that there's not something inside there that there's a prerequisite or a dependency on something that we know is going to be a very sensitive system. So there's two things there that we feel are required. There's an investment, a continuing investment in IT, and then there needs to be staff engagement, and that's engagement between IT and the business units to get us to a place where we can be in, the university as a resilient organization. What we see happening if we don't have that is that we get, suboptimal decisions, which we think we would get as well with having bad buckets of risk without granularity. So if we don't go out and have that engagement, that we'll be spending money, but we won't really understand where we need to focus our efforts to increase resiliency, and it'll just be a poor return. And then at the end, if we just don't have the investment, we have a head in the sand, which is after the HSE attack, we did a business continuity management exercise, or business continuity plan exercise across all units in the university. And a large percentage of them came back and saying, without IT, we would not be able to function. So we would we would basically stay in a holding pattern until IT recovered all our systems. And that is effectively, that's a head in the sand. And I think, to be fair to them, it was actually presented to them in a way that you don't have any IT systems. And I think we need to be better at saying, this is the most realistic scenario. How would you respond in this scenario? And that IT as well needs to help them. And then treading water then is effectively the same. If you have good staff engagement, but very little investment in IT, eventually disillusionment is going to kick in, and you're going to be, in the same position as head in the sand. So how to go about building a resilient organisation. So this is something from, I think it's adapted from Australian Business Continuity Journal. And these are just some of the steps that we have actually taken on board that are important to us. The first thing is to build a resilient incident management team, that the members of the team, they themselves and the team itself is resilient, that there's actually resiliency built into the response, that we know whose action it is to respond to certain items, where we need business expertise. Not all the expertise resides within IT. When we actually, at what level we go out to emergency, the emergency management response, and then also looking for those qualities, and from a management point of view, understanding the qualities that are necessary to have successful resiliency. Prioritizing reliability. So that's when we look at our systems, and when we look when our learnability of other events and what has happened, when we see what's happened in other areas, what can we do to reduce the dependency on those sensitive systems to prioritize reliability. So something that our identity manager, Patrick Nagel, has done is, so EduGate was authenticating off our on-prem domain, and now that's all authenticating off Azure AD. So in scenarios where we lose complete network connectivity to on-site infrastructure, or where there is a cyber attack where it's where on-prem infrastructure is not available, that authentication route will still be available. And that's something that we were able to learn from, I think it was in our analysis of Sheffield, that Sheffield had a lot of cloud systems. However, the cloud systems were all up and running, but there was a dependency in their authentication to hit some kind of system on-prem, and effectively they lost everything that they thought was resilient, was not. And part of that then is recognizing complexity. Some of that complexity we understand ourselves within IT. Some of that complexity we just don't understand, and we need to actually ask the business how they are using the systems that have been provided to them. And challenging the assumptions that we have. We thought that we had done really well with one unit in UCC and had actually gone through this entire process with them. And in one of the closing talks, a member came up to me and said, "Oh, there's one thing you said that we do this. That's not the way to do it. We do it this way with this system." And we need to go back to our governing assumptions and ensure that we're not just, in single loop learning, that we're actually going back and saying, is this right? And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is by talking to the business and talking to the people who use it day to day. Decentralized decision making, so that's allowing people, where possible, to make decisions themselves. What decisions can be made in a crisis at a local level? When it all comes into a central area, it starts becoming problematic. Know beforehand, know through scenario planning, at what stage a decision can be made locally in IT, what stage it needs to be made maybe by the emergency management team, but also when we go through the business management or the business continuity plan in each functional unit, they actually have listed what decisions they can make and what decisions they need to actually seek, or what communication they will be receiving from the central response. And knowing that beforehand just makes everything much more efficient. So in the business continuity management, then IT has a role in enabling and securing resilience, but we do need to ensure that we're actually asking each unit what their approach is. Building a resilient incident management team. So one of the main things we need to know there is understand where decision-making power and where the execution of that action actually resides. And this is really important kind of from a keystone stakeholder knowledge, and it needs to be documented. What we found is the same individuals keep on popping up in each system. That, like, you know, if a system goes down, this individual is essential for it to actually, for it to be back up and running. And because we know that, and because the same individual keeps on coming up, or the same individuals keep on coming up, we can see, okay, can we actually remove one of those systems to ensure that that is not in the actual failure and actually is more resilient? And those systems will be have been identified as the ones that we go after first in this resilience plan, that we make those resilient and actually free up, you know, those individuals who are essential. Acuity of individuals, so that's just the ability to actually, you know, see clearly if a change is made, what is the fallout of it, but also situational awareness, like, you know, when something is happening, when a decision is made, what else that will affect. Again, tabletop exercise beforehand, those things can be hugely beneficial, but actually you a lot of the times have to go through the actual scenario itself and actually act it out. And then just some of the other things of individuals, stress coping. I think, you know, Anna was talking yesterday about what we could learn from the Halifax explosion of 1917. With stress coping, I think we can learn a lot from you know, even further back from people like Marcus Aurelius and from antiquity, and stoicism, and not reliant on that you will be able to do the right thing at the time, but actually preparing for it beforehand and actually knowing that you will be able to cope with it. And there's an onus on management, of course, to ensure that the stress of teams is actually reduced. So the things that we've done quickly there, we've prioritized reliability. That's one of the things that our infrastructure manager has been working on. We've moved away from calling things mission critical because everyone wanted their system to be mission critical, and not everyone's system, well, it's mission critical to them. So what we've done is we've actually said that things are they're critical infrastructure. If something has multiple dependencies coming from it, if it's important to the actual chain that comes afterwards, that's the critical infrastructure. That's coming back first. There's no questions. And then we have just called them numbers: level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and we have recovery time objectives in there. Scenario planning, again, based on likely scenarios, and we give those likely scenarios out to each unit as we go through them, and we tell them what will be available and not, and what's not. The importance then of not just walkthroughs and tabletop exercises, we actually need to simulate these things. We actually need to say, okay, these are the things that we think are going to happen. However, as the NCSC said, there's stacked dependencies in there which we won't know about until it actually happens. So these things must be backed up by active simulations. Tabletops are essential, but it needs to be backed up by simulations. And then decentralized decision making, very, very difficult, but those decisions that can be made at a local unit level should be outlined in each unit's business continuity plan. They know what they can invoke themselves or what they can invoke when they get guidance from the emergency management team. And just quickly, where we are in our road to resilience, so we, as I said, we've educated an SSO, moved to Entra ID. So that's something that Patrick Nagel, our identity manager, has worked on. We've more and more systems moved to the cloud. Look, that's something, you know, cloud first has been there for a while, but, you know, the resiliency of the cloud is just over and above what is there, and that we don't have the dependency then back to on-premise system. We're revising our business continuity management plan. We've done our own. We've done one for, you know, 2 offices in UCC, and the plan is to go through, you know, the 70 functional units with them. And And then just to ensure that we understand that survivability is a property of the entire system. And by system, we mean people, process, and technology. And we don't just look at this as a system issue. We look at it as a problem as the system as a whole. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Barry. It's impressive you got Marcus Aurelius in there as a reference.
Yeah.
That was quite good. There's a couple of questions came in. I think you've answered some of them already, but we'll go through them one by one just to be sure that we've answered it to satisfactory. So you mentioned you were tracking resiliency as a key metric. How are you measuring resilience?
Yeah, okay, so the two measurements that we're going to have there at the moment is when we identify projects and when we identify tasks in our security work list, it will be marked whether or not it's relevant to the resilience of the organization. Okay. And if it is, it will be tracked then as a metric. So one of them is the endpoint movement. The other one then is how many units we've actually gone out to and gone through the scenario plan and actually signed off that they are not using sensitive systems and they actually do have something in place where if all the core on-prem infrastructure is not available to them, that they do have day-to-day operation available. So that would be tracked, so there's roughly about 70 units, functional units in the university, and we will, that'll just be presented as how many of them we've gone through.
Okay, thank you. I think you mentioned this as well. So do you have or have you plans to invoke a full live business continuity test to confirm resiliency?
So one of the things this year we had a shutdown of a key system. So we've done it system by system. That's a great question. Our preference would be to go to a full live shutdown. And I know the prison service actually did this, that they actually shut down all IT systems. And if they can do it in the prison service, we should be able to do it. We've gotten better at actually testing live systems rather than tabletop scenarios. So we actually shut off access to one of the data centers. We had an event in our data center the year before, and that actually taught us a lot about what would stay up and running and the assumptions where we were wrong in our assumptions. And we wouldn't have known how incorrect we were with certain things if that had happened. So we don't. It's not planned, but it is I agree, it's a great idea.
Yeah, nothing like the real thing. The last question we had in there was, how are you bringing the other units into the university with you, developing cyber resiliency?
Some of them are very willing, and I think when we look at organisations that have had cyber attacks, one of the key areas that has been problematic for them is payroll.
Yeah.
And so we actually identify the areas where we would go to initially and actually run through this exercise, first. What we have done here is Ger Cully our director has been talking with the enterprise risk manager in the university from our Office of Corporate and Legal Affairs, and our aim is to get this identified as an enterprise risk. That it's not an IT risk, that it's directed out of their office, and that gives it a bit more teeth then. So that is the goal. We're on that journey,
And everybody, the entire campus is getting this treatment. It's going right across the.
So so every unit after the HSE attack, we have their plans, from that time. Some of those have been reviewed, but we'll actually go through them as a proper scenario exercise where we go, these systems will not be available to you. And I think that's the big thing. When we asked them what they would do, payroll is a good example. I think all our payroll offices would rerun the last successful payroll. However, the files for that were located on a system that definitely will be in the, it had so many dependencies that it was, it'd be at the end of our recovery capability. So we've ensured that, in that disaster scenario planning, that they have availability to that, and that would be real disaster planning rather than business continuity.
Right.
But a combination of both. We're looking at both with them.
Yeah. And I think there's one more question I've pulled in there, just as the last one. Unfortunately for time, there are a few more coming in. But does the university have an overall business continuity plan as well as planning individual unit plans?
It does. So there's an overall business continuity plan, and within that called out a cyber risk, because it's on the university risk register. It's one of the principal cards it's called out. So there's, it's up there with, storms or, a major event with violence, and cybersecurity are all called out in the actions.
Floods.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
Easily. Okay, listen, thanks very much to both presenters. Thank you.